Hello and welcome to PEMCO TV, keeping you up to date with key insights from leading industry professionals within the world of commercial property management. I'm Melissa Kent. Today we are joined by Rob Riley, co-founder of Tenant Assistance Program, and we will be discussing why landlord and tenant engagement is so important. Hello Rob, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome, hello.
Given the subject matter, I assume you believe there has been a problem with landlord and tenant engagement. How do you see this showing itself?
Well, I think we're currently faced with a hangover of the more traditional institutional leasing program that has been typical in the UK property market for many, many years. We seem to find ourselves in a situation where managing agents and landlords may feel that a situation is not sufficiently broken to warrant changing it, and it's more what is not happening than what is happening. That being said, there is a general feeling of perhaps apathy, if that's the right word to use, from the tenant's point of view. A lack of attendance at tenant meetings is evidence of that, and also not placing property high enough up the boardroom agenda for a tenant means that the real estate components do tend to get overlooked. And those two factors alone show that not enough care and attention is being given to commercial property, both from a landlord and a tenant side. That being said, we have to consider what actually a landlord is. Currently, a landlord may, in this economic climate, be a tenant who himself is subleasing space and is not a professional landlord and is not used to engaging with occupiers. So we have to be careful how we define what a landlord is. But in our experience at TAP, we see a lot of large institutional landlords still not engaging with occupiers as much as they perhaps could do and indeed should do.
That's interesting. Has the situation improved in any way in recent years?
Well, I think it has, and I think there's evidence from recent tenant satisfaction surveys to suggest that the numbers are moving in the right direction, but we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves and think that everything is fine, because it's not, and the numbers themselves are struggling around the 5 out of 10 mark. They are, however, slightly up on previous year's figures. There's a trend also to witness landlords referring to their tenants as customers, and in so doing they are suggesting that there is an element of customer service that comes with that. So a tenant would now be expecting that. I think we can also see evidence of a burgeoning serviced office market, which has shown landlords that there is an expectation of service being given to tenants, and similarly tenants are looking to receive service from those landlords. So when they move out into the commercial leasing arena for more traditional occupation, there's a tendency that they would expect to receive some degree of customer service. So landlords need to be wise to that, and some are moving in that direction. We've seen, particularly in London, the evidence of building concierge services being offered in some of the premium towers, and this is a clear indicator that 6-star service in some instances is something that many landlords are striving for. Once you offer that, of course, to the customer, that's really when they begin to expect to receive it, and that'll permeate out into the market.
So what factors have influenced these improvements?
Well, we've seen government initiatives. For example, the CRC initiative has forced landlords to speak and communicate much more with their occupiers as they share data on energy and carbon emissions. The market itself, of course, has forced landlords and tenants to speak more regularly. Leases, according to some surveys, are now at an all-time low in terms of lease length, and that obviously forces a landlord to communicate more regularly than he used to with his occupier. And therefore discussions about how they would like to renew leases is going to become more prevalent, which will lead to engagement and hopefully a communication between not only the landlord himself but obviously the managing agent and his tenant.
Do you think further steps need to be taken to improve the situation?
Well, yes, I do, and I believe that proactive steps need to be taken by a managing agent and his landlord to engage with occupiers. These can take the form of regular communication messages sent by email, for example, into those tenants to make sure that they're receiving regular communication. Most of the tenant surveys that we've seen recently always come up with the request for greater levels of communication. Certain things are improving in terms of communication about sustainability, but again not at a great rate. regular communication from a landlord to a tenant, we believe, is the first step. Now, in order to receive that information, the landlord needs to be confident that he has the correct details of the recipient. In many cases, we find that the addresses that the landlord has to send messages to tenants is only the accounts department of that particular tenant. Now, that's not the right recipient of the information that really does need to be sent. And the messages that we would encourage a landlord to be sending are of a topical nature, of real estate matters that may be related to legislation. Particularly evident at the moment is messages on sustainability. Plenty of EU regulations coming through that we believe could and should be communicated to the occupier to make him a better informed tenant. So that is the first step, we believe. Perhaps even earlier than that, in pre-marketing, we think that leasing agents should be armed with greater levels of information about value-add management services that may be available to the tenants of the buildings that they're marketing. Managing agents, of course, are more used to this, but I think as an early step, it would be useful for many of the leasing agent community to be briefed so that upon viewing, they can give additional information to prospective tenants. That'll differentiate the building. It'll also differentiate the landlord. And in time, as the tenants sign up, one would hope that those tenants then become advocates of that particular landlord as they have received a value-add service that they may not otherwise have received from a competing building. Another thing a landlord could do at that early stage in pre-marketing is to perhaps offer an incentive to the incoming occupier in the field of compliance. Now, I know this is something that PEMCO can offer, and an incoming tenant could benefit, for example, a series of compliance documentation produced through evaluation on-site, and this can be used by those leasing agents as another inducement and a differentiator as the tour of buildings is undertaken. And I would suspect that not many landlords would be offering that.
Who will benefit the most from these improvements?
Well, we believe all parties will benefit. The tenant, I think, will benefit most, but initially I think if we look at the landlord, he should be able to differentiate his offering. He should be able to improve his own PR by being seen to be innovative and forward-thinking. And the early adopters of proactive change should see improved benefits. I think as you look forward, you'll find landlords looking to offer a best practice solution will benefit. But looking really at the tenant, he's the one that receives the service. He's the one that gets added value out of the relationship that is led initially by that landlord. The landlord and the managing agent will, of course, improve the workings of that particular building by having greater tenant loyalty, greater tenant retention, a lack of voids. If you look at the current state economically, most landlords would rather not lose their tenants and be faced with empty rates at the very least. So efforts do need to be made to try to retain tenants as best as possible. And again, there are plenty of examples of landlords that can and do this, but we would still refer to them as early adopters, and there are many more that could benefit from simple changes. This is not revolutionary, this is not terribly difficult to implement, but I think all parties can benefit if some simple measures are taken and proactive steps are made.
Do you think this is just a passing fad, or will this customer focus arrangement stick?
No, I don't think this is a passing fad at all. I think there's momentum now building, and it's here to stay. As I've mentioned, we've seen evidence of landlords choosing to refer to their tenants as customers, and I doubt very much whether they're going to retract that. So they'll be building on customer service going forward. Government initiatives, as I've mentioned, also are bringing the landlord and the tenant closer together, as they need to, and as more and more emphasis is placed on sustainability, then that is not going to be a passing fad either. The economic downturn continues, and we're at a point in the market where there's no real good news on either side. So you find someone needs to differentiate their offering over and above their competition. Were the market to improve in the landlord side, then you'll see greater competition anyway. So that landlord needs to differentiate his offering. That being said, the longer this downturn continues, the more attention a landlord needs to pay to his tenant anyway. If we look at the retail sector, we've got another quarter day nearly upon us, and in previous evidence you've seen tenants really struggling and retailers going under. So there's a really pressing need, we believe now, for landlords to maintain focus on their tenants at all times, and they can ill afford to lose sight of that.
Thank you very much, Rob. That's been very interesting. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on PEMCO TV.